Soldering for beginners. First, you need somewhere to do the work. If you haven't already got a bench, I suggest you make something like this. It's easy to make. This took just an hour or so. Cheap. The only thing that took any money was the small vise. I also suggest you cover the underside with Fablon baize. That's the green stuff used on billiard tables, etc. It helps to protect the surface on which you put the bench. Also helps to keep the household authorities happy, which is always a good thing. I've got the cutting mat, of course, which I use for cutting materials, etc, etc, but definitely not for soldering on because you'll melt it. I've done that, been there, had to buy another one. What I suggest you do next is make a small soldering bench, like the one I have here. Make it from wood. It doesn't conduct the heat away, and it's fairly cheap to make. In fact, it's very cheap to make. It costs virtually nothing. I made it from scrap wood. I used white glue to put the item on the left, which is at right angles to the base, so that way you can use it for when you're doing right angled joints on metal. Make sure that it is right angled, because if you're not going to get a right angled joint. It took overall 20 minutes for the white wood glue to go off and about an hour total for the lot. A very, very useful piece of kit. I use it all the time. As you will see later, we need to be able to get back to the bare metal, and we do that by using an abrasive. There are various things you can use, and starting on the left, here are some of them. The left is a brass suede brush. I got it from a shoe repairer's. I think it cost me about £1.50, not a lot. Next to are my files. Be careful with those because they can be rather harsh and leave nasty scratches. Be careful. Next to it is an emery board. Fine on one side, fairly coarse on the other. Again, be careful, can be a little bit too abrasive. The best thing I think is a propelling pencil type scratch brush. It has a glass fibre inside refill, which is rather good. You can also get brass and steel refills, but again be careful, might be a little bit too abrasive. Next to it there is something that I have had for a long time, a very big scratch brush used for very large surfaces. I'm not sure whether you can get them now, but they may still be around. The next is that maroon pad, which is a scouring pad. Get it from supermarkets in the cleaning area. It's used for pan scouring. A very similar item is used by the motor trade as a final rub down before they start painting. Underneath, of course, is our old friend emery paper or emery cloth. Get fine, don't get coarse, get fine. And that lump by the side of it is our old friend wire wool. That's excellent. In fact, if you get the fine wire wool, it's very good for cleaning the item up before you start to paint it. This is the soldering iron. I use Antex mainly because it's got a nice range of bits for each size iron. There are of course others, Wellers are perfectly okay. I wouldn't suggest that you go and buy one of these from a cheapo shop because they don't really last and they're a bit dodgy about temperature. This is a 25 watt, which I use normally. You've now got your soldering iron, and you need somewhere to keep it safe while you're working, especially when it's hot. This is an Antex soldering iron stand. Costs around £8 to £10, I think. Now when it comes, it has a small sponge, yellow like that, with a hole in the middle where you can keep your tip tinner and cleaner tin. Very good. However, eventually it'll wear out, it'll get ragged and you're going to throw it away. You can go to Antex and get a replacement sponge. It costs you about £4, I think, possibly more. However, what you can do is be crafty and go to the local supermarket, go to the cleaning area where you get washing up liquids and soap powders and things, and buy a packet of Spontex moppets. I'll show you what they are. You get 2 in a packet. You can get 3 of the stand sponges out of that if you do it carefully. So you end up with the ability to have 6 replacements. Of course, you could always use one of the sponges for washing up, which is what it's intended for. Once we start using the iron, we need to keep the bit clean. That's one of the ground rules, nice clean bit to the iron. And you can use various things to keep it clean. On the left I use a brass suede brush, cost me about £1 somewhere, long time ago, can't remember now. In the middle there is tip tinner and cleaner, and I'll show you that close up in a moment. On the right hand side there is a can, was baked beans, and I filled it with pan scourer, which is this stuff. You can get it from any supermarket, costs a couple of quid I think, if that. You get enough for 4 cans, which is rather a lot, so basically I've got it for the rest of my life. But don't ever use a file or steel on your iron. Emery cloth, not really, but it can if you're careful. But the best of either of those there. Now of course we need solder. 3 sorts here, they're all lead based. On the left you'll find solder paint, cream, whatever you like. In the middle is 188 degree solder, and on the right hand side is 145. They're all lead, no lead frees. There is another sort of solder which is multi-core, which is used for electrical soldering, and you don't need flux with that. It has flux in the middle. The only thing with that is it's perfectly okay, you can use it and it'll work, but it often leaves a thin film of shellac type stuff over the top of the joint, which is a bit of a perisher to get rid of if you want to paint. Now we come to flux. I use Power Flow, which is the one on the right. It's cream, it stays where you put it, and I like it. However, there are liquid fluxes. Cars do a whole range of various bottles, various coloured labels, but basically it's really phosphoric acid you need. So in the middle you have liquid flux, which is 9% phosphoric acid, and on the left hand side you have strong liquid flux, which is 12% phosphoric acid, which you can use on things like steel. Getting it off, well, the liquid is an acid, so you need an alkali. So if you get some bicarbonate of soda and some warm water and then wash off the residue, that will neutralise it. And for the Power Flow, warm water, 10% spirit methylated, and that will get it off. If you don't, then eventually you'll get a green surface verdigris, because the flux is still working and you don't need that. Right, let's do some soldering. What I'm going to do is join 2 pieces of brass together. Prepare the brass, tin the 2 pieces, and then sweat them together. Quite a simple process, but it involves all of the skills you'll need to be a successful solderer. Okay, here we go. Right, what I'm going to use today are 2 pieces of brass etch scrap. Get them from quite a number of kit manufacturers. I get these from Roxy Mouldings. He's got a box on the table. You help yourself and put a 2 or 3 quid in his collection box, and you've got lots and lots to play with. However, let's get started. The only thing is you've got to be very careful, because they have little tiny notches on the edge where the kit bits come off, and they are razor sharp. So you do need to start off with by getting those off with a file. I'm going to do that now, but not necessarily on screen. These are the nasty sharp bits you get on pieces of scrap brass from etches. They are very, very sharp, razor sharp in fact, and you will cut yourself. I've done it, had the plasters, and sworn. I'm now going to secure the work so that it doesn't move around as you're actually working, soldering or scratch brushing. And I'm going to use this blue tack. It's something that Every child I've ever taught from the age of 4 years onwards, and I ask them what it is, and instantly they all say, blue tack. Wonderful stuff, dirt cheap, use it and use it and use it. The piece you're looking at I've used for probably 2 years now. Good stuff. As you can see, the brass is clean, it's dry, there's no grease, but it still has oxidisation. We need to get rid of that layer, and we're going to scratch brush it to get rid of the oxidisation and get back to bare brass ready for soldering. The scratch brushing also gives it a key which helps the brass to stick. As you can see, I've now secured the work with the blue tack. I haven't put them opposite each other, I put them slightly apart, because if you put them opposite, what happens? You get a pivot and the work moves anyway. Put them apart and then it stays quite stable. Okay, right, let's do some scratch brushing. Right, what we need to do now, or what I'm going to do now, is I'm going to scratch brush the ends where we're going to make the joint. So I'm going to scratch brush from there to the end and from there to the end. Now, you scratch brush it like you mean it. Okay? Simple process, all done. As you can see, it's now bright and shiny. We're back to bare metal, ready to start the next thing, which is fluxing. Right, flux. I'm going to be using Fry's Power Flow. Now, like everything else, less is always more when it comes to things like soldering, so you only need a small amount. Hopefully you can see that, just a small amount, you don't need a lot. Then what you do is you smear it on the scratch surface, just like that. Again, you don't need a lot, because once you put the iron to it, it'll melt and spread. There you go, see, we haven't used a great deal at all. This is a close-up of the amount of flux you need. As you can see, you don't need a lot. Less is always more. You put too much on, you've got to get it off anyway, so just as little bit as possible. Providing there's some there, it'll help the solder flow. The iron is up to temperature, and so we go to pick it up. Now you always pick up an iron that way, not that way, because if you do, that gets in the way. If you pick that up, it doesn't. You pick it up, ready to clean the bit. Now the iron is nice and hot. What we want to do is make sure that the tip is nice and bright and shiny. Pick it up, quick wipe, and then with the tip tinner and cleaner, push it in. It'll melt and fizz a little bit. Okay. Knock any surplus off. Clean. Now either use the brush, the suede brush, or alternatively dig it into here. Then you'll come up with a nice, bright, shiny tip, which is exactly what you want. Now we'll start soldering. So what you do, pick the iron up, put the iron tip on the work, put the solder, which is 145 degree, couple of millimeters, turn the iron over and just rub it round. There you go. Let's do it on the second one. Tip on the iron, tip of the iron on the metal. A little bit of solder. Again, there you go. And remember the maxim, less is always more. You don't need a lot of solder, you really don't. Turn the iron off if you're not going to be using it in the next 4 or 5 minutes. It'll always come back to temperature in a couple of minutes. If you don't turn the iron off, you will eventually cook the bit and either have to do a complete re-tin or even buy another bit, and they're about 8 to 9 quid, so why bother? Now we're going to solder the two faces together. We're going to sweat them together. So what you need is a very tiny amount of flux, just a weeny bit. Put it on there just to help the flux flow, the solder to flow, and it gets hot. Okay, so we turn it over, face to face like that, and faithful blue tack fixes it for us. Now, don't get the blue tack too near the joint, otherwise it will melt, and it does pong a bit, I'm afraid. So what we need now is something to hold that down while we're working, and that is your third insulated finger, which you do thus. With the iron, give it a quick wipe, put the iron onto the joint and wait. There's a lot of metal here, so it will take a little while for it to start to flux, to melt, and you see the flux start to fizz. Here we go, it's doing it now. That's where you put that on hard, keeping the two together. Take the iron away and put it away. Always put your iron away, never leave it out. Keep pressing down for a few seconds. Wait for the solder to freeze. And then, hopefully, we have a joint. And we have a joint. Took a while, but as I said, there was a lot of metal there. Now, this is not the most complicated of joints you'll ever make, but it is the basis of all soldering. If you follow the instructions or you follow the rules, clean bright metal, clean, get through the oxidization, nice hot iron, clean bit, keep it clean, flux, great, plenty of heat on the iron, get in there and get out quick. You don't need a lot of solder. You put too much solder on, it's a heck of a job to get it off. However, you can, and I'll show you some methods of getting excess solder off. There are a number of ways of getting solder off. One is this little device, which I made up. It's basically a hacksaw blade that I've cut. I've sharpened the edge, wound the other bit round with string to give me a handle, and now you can slide it along and any excess solder you can get off. Get right into the corners. Nice little piece of kit. Takes about half an hour to make, dead easy. You can also get some things called gravers, which are square, very thin, well, not thin, 2 or 3 millimeters wide, square gravers. They're tool steel, and they have a chisel to a point, and they're very handy to do. But the only place I knew that had them were Chesto's. Whether or not they still have them, I don't know. Eileen's Emporium could possibly still have them. They did when I owned it, but there you go. Don't know now. Right, having done a basic joint, what I'm going to do now is show you how to do to join two pieces of metal together, right angles. Just takes a little bit longer with a few more bits and pieces, but it's well worth trying. And this is where we use the little L-shaped bit on the bench. This time we only need to braid the areas where you're going to put the solder. So that's along here, just along there. and along here. By the way, a good idea is always to brush off the surplus fiberglass, because it can get into your fingers. If it does, then just use a little bit of blue tack and roll it round and that will take it out. If that doesn't work, then the other side of sellotape. Just a bit of sellotape, or rub the blue tack around. Right, waiting for the soldering iron to heat up, so we add some flux. Again, not a lot. You just need a smear. Because once it melts, it runs. Bit on there. Again, not a lot. And a bit on there. Now what we're going to do is we're going to tin each of those edges in a few moments when the iron is hot. Right, the iron is nice and hot. Give it a quick wipe. Put a little drop of solder on the iron. Thus. And then slowly run the iron along and it will follow. There we go. Right, we've now tinned those two pieces. Not particularly well, because I had the shakes, but never mind. But we're ready to do the next part. We've now got the two pieces of metal nicely aligned, edge to edge. Make sure that they do align nicely. If not, fettle them with a file. Blue tack to keep it in place. The next thing we need to do is put some flux on the joint along where the solder is going to go. That'll be the next job. Right, flux nicely along the joint, so that when you do the solder will run after your iron. There we go. Not loads, just enough. As I said before, less is always more when it comes to solder and flux. Okay, we're ready now. Nice hot iron. What you do is you tack solder at one end, there you go, then tack solder in the middle, just a bit, so that as you start work it's joined. And when you run the final one along, the final fillet, it won't move. So, got it all tack soldered. The next job is to clean the iron. It's a bit, this is how I'm doing it. Nicely bright. Okay. Solder there and then run along. Just a little bit more. And we hope it's now done. We'll have a look when it cools down. Well, that's the finished article. Looks quite nice, don't you think? Look at the other side. and that's the other side. Give that a little fettle and it'll look quite nice. We'll do that. Well, there's the finished article. After a little bit of fettling and cleaning up, looks quite nice, don't you think? Let's have a look at the other side where the joint was. Right, just a few things to say about soldering. Soldering is fairly safe providing you take adequate precautions. Soldering irons get very hot in the 200 to 300 degrees centigrade. They will burn you instantly if you touch them. So whenever you go to pick a soldering iron up, always look what you're doing. Don't just think that's where it is, I'll pick it up without looking, because at one stage you will pick it up with the wrong end. Another thing is, don't try to catch it if you drop it. Let it fall. If you try and catch it, sure as God made little apples, you'll catch it by the wrong end, and it don't half hurt. Also, solders contain heavy metals, lead, cadmium, antimony, and all sorts of nasty things. So don't, if you can, inhale the fumes, especially from 145, which has cadmium in it, okay? When you're working, don't eat or drink whilst you're doing it. Once you've finished, wash your hands before you touch any food or you touch your mouth. Keep young children away from solder. They love chewing things, and you never know. Chewing a piece of 145 solder is not a good idea. Okay. Now what you've just seen is basic soldering. That's how you do it. Clean joint, clean metal, clean iron, flux, solder, secure the work and do it. Okay. Now once you've done that, my suggestion is that you get some scrap metal, some scrap brass, nickel, silver, whatever, and just play. Just play with it, do all sorts of silly things, do whatever you like. But above all, don't go and buy an expensive loco kit for 200 or 300 quid, because believe me, you won't do it until you've had experience. You must get experience first, okay?